Thank you for being here. I think I know most of you, but for those that do not, my name is Jacqueline Brickman, and I am an assistant professor in kinetic imaging. And I'm pleased to welcome Ash Arder to our new KI program in the Gwen Frostig School of Art today. We had a wonderful morning together with Art 1090, Time and Process, in a physical computing workshop where students painted with conductive paint and made interactive sounds. Ash is a transdisciplinary artist whose research-based approach works to expose, deconstruct, or reconfigure physical and conceptual systems, especially those related to ecology and or industry. Arder manipulates physical and virtual environments to explore object and mark making, mechanical portraiture, sound design, and performance as tools for complicating dynamics of power between humans, machines, and the lands they occupy. Ash received an MFA from the Cranbrook Academy of Art. They have participated in an array of residencies and fellowships, exhibited their work across the U.S., including at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit, Transformer in D.C., and at the Kitchen in New York. Ash is currently a fellow at Cranbrook Academy of Art in Fiber Art. So we met together in 2016 at Nomad Detroit, which was a trade-based event hosted by Pops Packing in Hamtramck. Ash was using bicycle parts, turned upside down, to work with nettle fibers, and I was instantly intrigued by her approach to making. I was just like, what is going on there? And then I also have this memory of when we both participated in the Monster Drawing Rally at MoCAD, which was to benefit a fundraising event. And every other artist is like at a table, like painting or drawing, and I think I was like cutting pieces of paper and collaging. Ash has paper on the floor and a nettle stalk and is like whacking the paper with ink or mud, I'm not sure, but I've just always really been intrigued by your process and the way that you so thoughtfully engage like organic materiality with technology. So I'm just so pleased to have you here with us, and I hope that you all will join me in welcoming Ash.
Thank you so much for having me. It is always a pleasure to come and not just speak, but also get an opportunity to do a workshop and do some hands-on things. So really appreciate that. I'll just set my little timer here so that I don't go over. So today I essentially want to take you through a kind of cursory overview of some of the ways that my process functions. As Jacqueline said, I'm transdisciplinary, so I don't really work in one particular area. So some of the ways that I break down projects is based on concept, so or site or place of kind of research or thinking. So this presentation will run through the garden as a sort of site conceptually and physically. We'll run through the street as a site, and then we'll run through the farm. And this was just a kind of way to orientate this presentation today. If you see me again, it might look different, but this is where I'm at today. And I'll show you some of the current works that I'm working on, and then I'll show you kind of sometimes where those current ideas came from and the kind of trajectory of the process in practice. So here's the In the Garden section. We'll start with a really recent project called Hoop House. It looks like whoop, but it's pronounced hoop. And this is essentially a large-scale performance stage, solar power energy hub, and invitation for musicians and storytellers to kind of gather and tell stories and make sounds in a natural landscape. This was launched last summer, just a soft launch, and it'll continue to move around neighborhoods in Detroit this coming summer. And I'll just show you a quick little video of some of what this looks like. There's an event that's called Solar Juke, which is a play on the juke joint. And if anyone is interested in sort of some of the themes of any of the works that I don't talk about here, I'm happy to answer some questions at the end. So here's this little video.
The sun. The sun. You feel it? The sun. The sun. Do you know it? The sun. I feel it. The sun. I know it. The sun. I went there. The sun. The sun. Do you know it? The moon. The moon. Do you know it? The moon. We in tune.
So the other thing I'll say about that project is it's essentially an invitation to anyone to show up with your instruments, and you can literally plug. Maybe I'll go back a bit. You can plug right into the sculpture itself. So there's 3-prong outlets. There are 4 audio inputs, and they can kind of be switched. It can be 2 outputs and 2 inputs, but you can plug your electric guitar or your keyboard directly into the sculpture. And then in the back is a sort of mixing board, and the speakers are behind these sort of circular shapes there, which are vectors of patterns from my great-grandmother's quilt. But yeah, the sound comes right directly out of the sculpture after people have plugged into it and then put their instruments into it and amplified the sound. So this is also an opportunity for me to expose folks to solar. So that's a huge part of my practice, is thinking about ways to make things that sometimes can seem overly technical or maybe out of reach, just exposing more people to some energy agency, an opportunity to address our carbon footprint, and just think about the ways that we can deploy clean energy in our everyday life and in our art. This is that nettle fiber that Jacqueline mentioned earlier, and I show this right after hoop house because the trajectory of getting to a hoop house, which is an 8-foot by 5-foot by 10-foot tall object, right, that sits on a plot of land in Detroit. Getting to that scale involved a few other types of ways of working, and part of it was going to Cranbrook to get an MFA and studying in the fiber department. So I'm a textiles and fiber person by trade, and what I was doing there was essentially foraging for stinging nettles around Detroit. Do people know what stinging nettle is? Have you heard of that? Some people, yeah, okay. So it's kind of like hemp. The process of extracting fiber from it is kind of like hemp. It's a bast fiber. So the fiber is in the stalk of the plant. So I was essentially doing that, and this is kind of what it looks like. So there's like a month-long process that you have to put the plants through, and then by the end you get not very much fiber for kind of a lot of plants. So what I ended up doing ultimately was starting to think about the implications of doing this work, because if I'm living in Michigan and working in Michigan, half of the year I don't have any materials, right? So I had to kind of start to think a little bit differently about how to have a conversation about what it means for someone in the 21st century to kind of be like hand-making fiber from plants found in an urban space. So this is kind of what that looks like. This was my thesis project. It's called Broadcast Number 3. And I like to show this too because this was another kind of stepping stone to a large-scale sculpture like Hoop House. What you see here is essentially a kind of interactive sound sculpture that kind of references visually some sort of DJ setup / garden / experimental like laboratory moment. But what is happening here is there are 4 beds of soil in trays on the top of the sculpture, and inside of these wooden boxes are speakers. And so when I activate this piece through performance, I show up to the gallery with a cassette player that's pre-programmed, or I have a cassette in there with a 20-minute composition that is thematically explores plants, my own family history, found sounds. I play that, I push play, and then I go around and I put stinging nettle seeds in top of the copper couplings on each of these beds of soil. So I kind of go around and I put seeds inside of those spaces. And then I play the analog synthesizer along with the soundscape that's coming out of the tape player. And there's enough vibration through the sound to create movement inside of the boxes for the seeds to catapult outside of the boxes onto the beds of soil. So it's this kind of double meaning of broadcast, right? Most of us know broadcast as the dissemination of data, right, or data transmission. In agriculture, broadcasting just means to disperse seeds randomly. So I'm really interested in the kind of double meanings that can occur between sectors or disciplines, and kind of flipping them on their heads or hacking them or intervening in a way that first it starts as a question for myself, and sometimes the question asking process results in an object that someone wants to put in a space. But ultimately, I needed to build this in order to answer this question for myself in my own mind. When the sculpture is not being activated, there's a reoccurring kind of looped sound that sounds a little bit like a heartbeat. So it's just kind of boom, boom in the space. So it's active when I'm not there performing. But yeah, this was kind of one of the ways that I pivoted. I wasn't able to get access to plants all the time, so I started thinking about what does it mean to maybe be a pollinator of stinging nettle, me as a human. Am I a pollinator of this plant? What are the ways that I could participate in making more of it, or collaborating in some sort of way? And this is kind of an example of kind of scale and how it looks when I'm activating it. The next project that needed to kind of happen in order for last summer's sculpture to happen is this project called Disco Gardens, where I was invited by this residency space in Brooklyn, New York called Recess to come there and install basically an indoor garden in their space. So it was a little bit experimental in that there weren't very many plants in this garden, but rather than plants, there was this small collection of analog media, so vinyl records, on a shelf inside of garden beds that I built. And they all reference gardens in the subject matter or in the titles. So this is an ongoing project where I'm accumulating records and cassette tapes, specifically vinyl, or specifically analog media, and just building an archive of what is popular culture and what is Black music saying about the human-plant relationship, right? So if that's a prompt, what is this sample? Are there themes? Is the rose always used like this, right? What is the artwork telling us? So these are just some of the album covers from some of the items in the collection. This is kind of what it looks like. These garden beds are modeled off of tree pits in New York City. There's a whole system around how you can have a small garden in front of your building in New York City, and your tree pit, which is what they call it, has to be a certain size. The corners can't be higher than this. The materials used can only be this. And I didn't know that until I was actually in Brooklyn for the summer and walking every day from my apartment to the gallery, and just like fascinated by all of these kind of what I now know as tree pits, but basically like a little, like, I don't know, it kind of felt like a cage for trees, which I wasn't really into that. But I was just fascinated with all of the different like styles and variations, so I started doing research on it. And yeah, I modeled the size off of that. My friend Johan Diedrich, who's a sound artist in Brooklyn, activated this piece with a performance called Orchids, where he interviewed his grandmother, who lives in Miami, where he's from, about her experience with her orchid garden. So it's a really beautiful kind of composition and live performance where he's using materials from the library mixed in with audio recordings from his grandmother talking about her experience cultivating these plants. And then you can kind of see this is how the audience would be in the space. This also involved several listening sessions where the public was invited in off of the street to just like listen to one particular song on one record with me for about 2 hours, an hour of listening and an hour of discussion. And it really is just kind of what happens when we decide to like put our phones down and just be together and listen to something, and then talk about it in depth. We're not listening to all of the songs on the album, just one song. So that was some of the other ways that this got activated. In keeping with the garden theme, this kind of, for those of you that were in the workshops today, this project called Two Stoned, which is 2 rocks from my late father's yard in Flint, Michigan, where I'm from. These rocks are being activated by my cousin, who, when touching them, it triggers sound that happens in the space. So again, thinking about, what are the entry points in a landscape for people to kind of story tell and story find and story keep and collaborate. And there's conductive paint. So I use conductive paint on these rocks and then covered them with other colors. So you don't actually know which zones are going to trigger which sounds, but the things that you hear in this space are my aunts and uncles talking about their experiences growing up. Actually not growing up, mostly traveling back to Mississippi, where my family is from. And just things about the landscape, my great-grandmother's farm. So different zones will trigger different aunts and uncles' stories happening in this space. And I really love that several generations of my family can kind of experience this. This is really special. That project, that was 2022. So the next one, just to kind of show a trajectory, this project was done in 2017 when I was in grad school. It's called Storybox, and essentially there is audio equipment inside of this box, and when this valve is turned, so this is kind of like the same valve you might see on the side of a house for like a hose, but just kind of hacking or redirecting familiar interfaces or things that we wouldn't associate with sound, but we know what the motion is to activate that. So whenever you turn the valve, it raises or lowers audio of my father telling stories about learning how to garden. So it's acting, for the technical folks, as a potentiometer. And it's just a kind of simple, it wasn't that simple, but it looks simple, a simple hack of an existing form to do something new. So the next part of the presentation is kind of looking at the street. I'm super fascinated lately with kind of the automotive industry and the forms and materials that come out of that industry. I'll preface this with, so both sides of my family participated in the Great Migration, so they moved up from the American South to the north to work in the automotive factories. And so I think part of this new interest in this is to kind of like trace back my own family's like relationship to, contribution to, questions about struggles in automotive kind of legacy in this country. And so this piece is a kind of, it's called Joey, but it's a blob with a found tail light in it that actually functions just as a lamp or a light. So I've been kind of finding these lights and lamps just on the side of the road. You know, I live in the Motor City and people get into accidents and just leave whole pieces of cars in someone's front yard. And so I've been collecting them and then sort of maybe thinking about and studying the forms, but then also making new forms out of them. I'm still in the middle of it, so I don't really know what it's about, but I think what's happening for me as I'm trying to build a new world out of an existing memory or something, or a legacy of memories. And so some of the new world reintroduces forms that are familiar to us, but in a distorted way, or in a fun, cute way, or in a fuzzy way. This is another project from In the Streets. This is found Corvette seats, the foam inside of Corvette seats, and I can't think of what these are called right now. What are these called again? Huh? Tailpipes. Tailpipes, thank you. Yeah, tailpipes that I bought with cigarettes stuffed in either end. This is called The Kiss, which is a kind of play on another artwork. But I'm using the kind of absence but hint of the human body to think through the kind of intimacy that happens between not just humans and the machines that we use all the time, but the parts and materials in those machines themselves. So what kinds of conversations are they having with one another when we're not, there or deploying them? And what are some of these kind of like more masculine, or what we might think of as stereotypically masculine forms, like this sort of steel chromic like tailpipe, or the Corvette as a kind of like machismo object maybe. What does it mean when they're positioned together and maybe in an erotic or a queer embrace? How can some of those materials of the automotive industry be reshaped to ask a few other questions? This is a little video, but this is just some early exploration in some of these found lights and ways to make them interactive. So I've been messing around with basically rewiring them, taking the existing lights out, putting my own in, and then using sensors to monitor proximity. So when people start to approach them, do they do something, right? And how does that implicate you as a viewer? What does it make you feel? Because if these are the eyes of the vehicle, what does it mean when they're removed from the rest of their body and then positioned back at us? So this is just like me, a cell phone video of some of my like tests. I'm using two different kinds of sensors in this, an ultrasonic sensor in one and a motion sensor in the other. I'm still testing out which one works the best, but when I back up, the lights go off, and just playing around with how sensitive do I need to make the sensors. Okay, on the farm. So getting back a little bit to my fiber background, and I think it was 2017, I was commissioned to make a sound piece by a gallery in New Orleans, and they knew that I was working with stinging nettle and looking into plant-based materials, and they asked if I could research something that was more place-based. So I started looking into basically what are some of the plant-based textiles that were thriving or originated in Louisiana. I found this document called the Ramey Machine Trials at New Orleans and started reading it, and I was immediately really jarred by the language in this document. This is the United States Agricultural Department initiated this kind of study or trial. They basically put an open call out to machinists from all around the country. Show up with your DIY hacker machine and let's see if we can process this plant, right? So a bunch of people showed up to Audubon Park, 1888. And this was just a technical document. It's supposed to be what happened, right? This is a technical document. It's not supposed to be subjective, what happened. And what I was finding is that as I read through the pages of this, it was feeling the language that they were using to talk about the way that the machines were dealing with the plants felt very bodily, and it felt very aggressive, and it felt really violent. And so I started to kind of sit with, this notion that agriculture or any cultivation of plants, if we're thinking about plants as sentient kind of beings, which they are, right? It's been proven that they can sense sort of what's going on in the environment and then respond with a stress level or with a relaxed response. So we're thinking about plants as these sort of sentient beings. What does it mean then that agriculture is just kind of inherently violent, right? And that was the first time that I kind of had to sit with my own works that were pulling stinging nettle out of their home, out of the ground, right? And then pulverizing them in the name of art. Reading this was like, whoa, like if I'm thinking about these plants as collaborators, why am I acting so violently towards them? So what followed is essentially, I'll play a little bit of it, but it's a soundscape. And if you're able or comfortable, if you find it comfortable to close your eyes and listen, it's essentially a restaging of this 19th century failed agricultural experiment where found sounds mixed with literally just me reading items from the report. I did not change anything. I left some things out, but I read it in order from top to bottom.
Methods of removing. Scraped and cleaned by cheap hand labor. Sent into our markets. Must be removed by chemical or mechanical action or a combination of both. Operated upon. The mechanical treatment has to be followed by a more or less intense chemical one for the removal of the last remaining. The breaking of the more or less brittle and rash, fresh from the field and stripped, secure rolled into bands, then dried partially or wholly by artificial heat, brittle enough to be removed by subsequent beating and combing. Sometimes this mechanical after treatment has been omitted. Ready for a final coating for spinning with or without preliminary bleaching. Cut at the time when the oldest portion is just turning color. Secured from when fully dried, I am not subjected to the action of breaking after bleeding or combing, and brought my team portion to their perfection. Ready for the alkaline bath. Become so brittle that the breaking and beating is worked at very different degrees of maturity. Must be attacked with a large number of machines in order to secure uniformity. Turned out. Secured from the plantation of Captain Willie, 2 miles beyond Algiers, across the river, and brought by teams to Audubon Park.
So we're still in the farm, and we can also just take a little moment because every time I listen to that, it feels like I need like a happy song as a palate cleanser. So I've spent a lot of time in New Orleans, and part of it was sparked by that commission. I was a resident at a studio in the woods, which is a really amazing residency. And I decided to start exploring large-scale farming equipment because I was just fascinated about this relationship between humans and the machines. Especially, this was born out of my interest in human-plant relationships. But then when you enter into an agricultural space, you have to deal with the implement or the kind of machine. And so I ended up getting really fascinated with the machine-plant sort of interaction. So I found myself at the John Deere factory in Thibodaux, Louisiana, which is about 2 hours outside of New Orleans, and this is a sugarcane harvester, and it's massive, it's really dangerous, and doesn't know a human from a bunny rabbit. So I just really became really fascinated with some of the indicators or kind of like safety mechanisms in place to keep fleshy, soft humans safe from these sort of very large, hard, sharp machines. I also went to a sugarcane mill in Jondriette. This is just a still image from so much video and sound that I collected from this mill. But yeah, I show these things because sometimes my work looks like going into spaces like this, right? And I consider that just as much the work as a sculpture that goes in a gallery. So finding myself at a John Deere factory, taking video and photo of that, finding myself at a sugarcane mill, taking video and photo of that I might never show to anyone, right? It might just be for me. But I always like to make sure that folks know that even if you don't see everything, it's still part of the work for me. And empower other people to kind of be okay with a process-based journey, right? And keeping some things for yourself. This is a more recent trip. This is a still image from this year. I actually treated myself for a birthday present in January. I was in New Orleans again. And yeah, I just went to a cotton innovation lab and took an 1.5-hour tour through here. This is just one room, but again, I'm always capturing forms and materials and processes to help think through this relationship between humans, materials, and then the machines that are assisting in that relationship. And also, some of this is just cold calling, right? I didn't have any relationship with anybody at the lab. I didn't even know it existed. I drove by doing something else, and I saw it, I looked it up, I emailed the person who I found online, and they were very enthusiastic to welcome me. So, yeah, it's always important for me to let people know that too. I don't just have a bunch of connects in random factories and mills, but I found that people are really willing and interested to share their process and journey with you if you just ask. This is a little video that I show from some experiments that I was doing again with conductive paint at my residency at a studio in the woods. You basically live in the woods and they give you a studio, and yeah, you can make things. This was a kind of prototype for the side knives on the sugarcane harvester. So I was working with I think some vinyl tubing, some cardboard, just to try to recreate the forms that I saw and then painting them John Deere green, which is a color you can actually buy. And again, just like setting up a scenario whereby people could interact with objects that I had made so that I could see, as a question asker, what was happening for them, right? Like, what was interacting with this thing that makes sounds, but you don't know when or how it's going to make a sound. What was that doing for a user? I just wanted to see what happened. So this is kind of some early studies in that. I'm also interested in what happens when this sort of object that's supposed to be maybe cold or inanimate makes a sound like a baby laughing, or a sound of like a human experiencing pleasure. Those kinds of things are really stimulating to me, and I'm still working through some of this, but yeah, ultimately I don't think that objects are passive. I think that they're made up of matter and material. They're putting out energy, they're receiving energy. This is some kind of like new materialisms framework, but yeah, I don't think objects are sitting around waiting for us to pay attention to them in order to be putting out energy. This is, I think these are some of my last slides, but this is a project where, so when it was time to go back to Michigan, I realized that I didn't really have access to, or maybe I was in New York at the time. Either way, I didn't have a lot of access to these kind of like sugarcane mills and large-scale agricultural equipment anymore, but I was still interested in like exploring them and looking at them. So I started to play a video game called Farming Simulator, and yeah, you really could just get really up close and personal with a lot of, farm equipment. So that was wonderful, and I could capture my gameplay. No, I wasn't doing what you're supposed to do in the game, right? I wasn't actually farming for the sake of farming. I started to more use the tractors and the fields and the supplies as mark making tools, and to kind of, I became fascinated with kind of vectors and digital forms that were supposed to be representing some of these other organic materials like seeds and plants, but also snaps and kind of like knobs and lights and buttons. So yeah, I started to basically and I'm still doing this, but carving digital land and manipulating digital land. It's almost like, kind of like land art, right? But I'm just using digital space, or concrete poetry, So this is just a video that this showed at the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit in 2021. And I'm trying to kind of focus on some of the bodily or kind of like organic or visceral vectors that are showing up through this gameplay. last thing I'll say about that kind of suite of work is I've started to do this gameplay as performance. So I was in Omaha for a residency at a space called Bemis, and the residency is in the meatpacking district, so a space where a bunch of food historically has been transported and stored and sold. And on the side of the building, there's just this perfect white square, and I think it's because they tore down part of the building and that was an office, so that wall was just painted. But I basically took a scaffolding out and sat on top of it with a really powerful projector and just live carved some messages into some digital soil from the Garden of Bemis and projected that. So it's kind of a durational performance in that if you're in the audience, you really have to be following my tractor the whole time because I never zoom out to tell you what I'm saying. You just have to follow and sort of see what I'm writing. But it's a message, and I think it's about, maybe it was like 30 to 45 minutes, and people sat in the garden and just sort of watched as that happened. So I'm interested in doing sort of some more of these where I just send a message to everyone or to myself, but just use some of these digital tools and kind of flip this idea of who gets to manipulate land, what land, what's a way to do it in a way that's not actually maybe actually extractive. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of space to play, and that's my timer. Thank you so much. That's it. Do we have time for questions or anything?
We sure do. Yeah. What questions do you all have?
Or comments? Yeah.
Are you a full-time artist? Like, is that how you support yourself?
That is how I pay my bills. Yep.
What was that journey like for you?
Yeah. What was the journey like of being a full-time artist? I think I realized really early that there was no one-size-fits-all path. And in undergrad, I went to University of Michigan for undergrad. One of the things, I didn't realize this at the time, but one of the things that I was doing in my extracurriculars was throwing a bunch of like arts-related events, music events, concerts, film screenings, exhibitions. And I was doing that because it was fun and I wanted my favorite artists from around the country to come to campus. But in hindsight, I realized that there's a name for that, and like that's an actual job. It might be categorized under like maybe arts administration or cultural production. So I was doing that as an undergraduate student, and I didn't know it at the time, but a lot of those skills, so putting together budgets, knowing how to reach out to someone to invite them somewhere, collecting receipts for materials, creating proposals so that the school and different departments in the school would give money, making the flyer for the event, getting people into the room, documenting it, like all of those things were the things that I would use in my kind of career following college. So it was that. I ended up as an arts administrator for about 5 years before I decided to kind of focus full time on my art. And I think, so what that means is like I was basically going around the state of Michigan, working with artists to understand what their challenges were and their opportunities. I spent some time in Kalamazoo doing that, but just having one-on-ones with artists and throwing events to kind of see what would you like that you don't have, what resources do you have that you want to share. And some of the things that I was also doing was like organizing professional practice workshops. So just through doing that work, I kind of knew what it took to like really have a sustainable practice, because it was my job to kind of aggregate resources and share them with artists. Legal resources, economic resources, how do you do your taxes, right? How do you file for a patent or something. Yeah, so I think that really helped me because I knew what, in theory, I knew what I know what you're supposed to do. Was I doing it all the time? No. And it also became really apparent that as someone who was making work kind of like after 5 o'clock, right after I got off work, but I was not eligible for any of the things that I was promoting, right, because I worked there. I had a problem that a lot of artists have the opposite problem. I had all the networks, right, all over the world because we're bringing in curators and artists and galleries to talk to artists in the state, and I'm their point of contact. And they always ask, like, so what are you working on? And the answer was always a little bit kind of shady. I never had any time to work on my own stuff. So, yeah, so arts administration set me up to kind of know what to do. And then just kind of deciding to go back to grad school really helped me have the time and the space to make so that I could have something to deploy into those like frameworks of this is how to be a sustainable artist. So I would say the journey was a little bit, it was intentional, but in a kind of serendipitous way, right? I know how to reach out to mentors and to kind of keep my finger on the pulse of what's happening in a place. I know how to be kind of like in proximity to conversations around funding, being a juror, signing up to volunteer as a juror for some sort of art fund, right? So that I know what kinds of questions they're asking in those rooms where artists aren't, right? Where they're deciding who's going to get the funding. So just like, I don't know what made me have the audacity to like ask if I could be a reviewer. But yeah, I think it felt really natural and organic, but there was a lot of mentorship. I benefited from a lot of mentors. I made a lot of mistakes, you know, but I would say it's been fruitful, and I would be lying if I said it's really planned out. Honestly, I just kind of show up to life every day and I try to put out some positive energy or a specific kind of question or intention. And when people see that that's what I'm putting out, when they hear of things or they teach a class, right, they're like, oh, you know, Ash just asked that question that time at that dinner, or, you know, so I think just showing folks who you are creatively, or what questions that you have and asking them together, that created a lot of space for me to be in a lot of different rooms. But it's been pleasurable. It's not always easy, but I think my arts administration background really, really helped me. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
So I'm seeing, thank you, of course, for coming and presenting your work. I see that you're working a lot with like technology to kind of accomplish these things in, you know, different pieces, or collaborating with technologists, like in the sound art performer that came to your installation.
Mm-hmm.
How does kind of, you're also like thinking a lot and interacting a lot with how machines are kind of interacting with both people and other things.
Mm-hmm.
How has kind of those thoughts for you in that exploration affected maybe how you approach technology from like just a purely technical means of like, this is what I need to accomplish for
Mm-hmm.
this piece of art?
Totally. Thank you for asking that. I think there's a couple of answers. So I think early on, maybe 10 years ago, I thought I needed to do everything, right? And I tried to do everything. And that was useful in some ways, right? It sort of like helped me understand what questions to ask, what terms were being used in a particular technique or sector. but it also took up a bunch of time, and I didn't even like doing some of it, ultimately. So it was like I just spent 6 months trying to learn how to do fill in the blank thing, only to kind of get it to do what I want, and I did not enjoy the experience. But I think I needed to kind of maybe do that in order to realize that I didn't like that thing. You know, sometimes you don't know you don't like a process until you try it. And where I am now is I like to think about like projects or workflow in a category of ways. It's like, what's the thing that I'm good at, that I like to do? Let me try to do as much of that as possible. Like that, if it's a weighted category of thing, I like doing it and I'm good at it. Like, let me try to just do that as much as possible. What's the thing that I like to do that I'm not good at, right? Also make space for that. Maybe that's an opportunity to do a residency or a studio visit or visit a lab or something. That's like a mentorship opportunity. What's the thing that I'm not good at and I don't like doing it? Outsource, right? Like, who do I know that can accomplish this thing in 15 minutes that would take me 3 months? And let's let them do that. And then, what's the other one? Don't like, don't want to do. And maybe it's the thing that like I don't like but do want to do. I don't know, I might have already said that. But I kind of look at it like that. And I think that what has allowed me to do that, I think resources, right? Just having resources to accomplish projects. I think I was doing everything before because I didn't have enough resources to hire someone, right? In a way that felt good, to actually be able to pay them for their time. But now, as some of the projects are more are in different conversations in different spaces, and my practice has started to expand and evolve, now I can kind of like budget in. Like, I know that I'm gonna need 5 contractual helpers or people. I can kind of know, let me just budget in this so that when it comes time to make it to code, for example, I can code a little bit, and I like doing it sometimes, but ultimately, if I have an idea in my head or an interaction in my head, I just want to see the interaction happen. Sometimes the process of getting there is pleasurable, sometimes, but honestly, I really want to just be like, I want that light to come on when I approach it. That's basic level stuff that I can accomplish. Now, if we're starting to get deeper than that, right, send those coordinates to a server and then make these 5 other electronics that are on that server say, hey, whatever. Like, okay, now we're starting to get a little bit out of my depth. Yeah, those are things that I would really love to just like phone a friend, because sometimes that part isn't even the main project. It's just the little thing that I need to get to in order to see what the next step is. But yeah, and I also don't feel shy about hitting people up and saying like, hey, I see you have a laser vibrometer in your lab. Can I come and check that out? And usually, especially in academic spaces, people are like, they're not used to having artists in their labs. So they're really excited about it and fascinated, which is, I've been lucky in that regard. People are like, what, you want to come and see what we're doing? Cool. But yeah, I think people are more willing than you think to allow you to come in and see what they've got going on, because they love it. And the people that are already in the lab don't want to hear each other talking about, why this is cool. They're just trying to get their work done and get out of there. But if it's somebody they can sort of expert-splain to, like me, who I don't know anything about what's going on, oh, they love it. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of, I'm sorry.
There's a few.
Oh, I don't know any of your work before this. I quite frankly got an email. I'm actually a music student,
Sweet.
but I'm very curious in the Hoop project.
Mhm.
And did you mostly come up with yourself, and how many people did you collaborate with to make that happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. Conceptually, it was my idea. And once it started to get to a scale that started to feel architectural, I phoned a friend. So my good friend and collaborator, Kapish Singh, who is an architect that went to Cranbrook with me. I was just like, hey, what are you working on this summer? Do you want to do this? So I collaborated with an architectural designer to kind of take some of the ideas that were in my head and start to think about them spatially. And we spent about like 6 months just like meeting up at each other's houses and talking through what do we want people to do? How do we want people to feel? We knew that solar was kind of the anchor, right? Like that's a huge piece. We knew that storytelling and music was an anchor. How do we cross-pollinate all those things? Kapish knew of a fabricator who builds a lot of stuff for their architecture firm. So they looped in a fabricator, master carpenter, right? I don't have to be in here trying to figure out how to do all these like very specific latches and grooves and things. No, Tom, that's your expertise, right? You do that. So architectural designer, fabricator, I had a few people help kind of like install on different occasions. It's a modular piece, so it comes apart and you can kind of move it to different locations. And you know, that takes a team. I try to do physical work by myself, not because I want to, but I have a hard time asking for help sometimes. So 3 or 4 people just to like install sometimes whenever it needed to like move or change shape. And then all the musicians. So it kind of gets activated. It's probably been activated maybe like 5 or 6 times outdoors. And then it was at University of Michigan where an entire class, the Creative Arts Orchestra activated it for an hour-long performance. So endless musicians, right? Just a bunch of musicians. And yeah, that was I think when the scale is big like that, I don't even try to pretend like I can, like my brain doesn't even go to, oh, just do it. It's like, you need some support. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I really find like how you like use nature and like that's very cool. But I was like really curious as to like how you got into using fiber, and like what kind of I guess like made you interested in that route at first.
Yeah, I love that question. I don't get to talk about this much, so I feel really happy to. So I think I was really interested in fashion first, right? And I started getting really invested in understanding like sustainable fashion systems. And through that kind of like research, I learned about a sector or field called fashion theory. And that was blowing my mind because it was all of the sort of politic and culture around the garment and not even the garment itself. And I was doing old projects that maybe are in the deep corners of the internet, where I was basically just kind of like trying to understand what people's relationships to their garments were. And then the more and more I heard people talk about like their relationship, I was like, oh, it's not even really about garments, right? It's about textiles, right? Textiles don't just have to be on clothes. They're in carpets, they're in our cars, they're everywhere. And so that was kind of like my trajectory. I think I thought I was going to like the new school for fashion theory. And then upon further review, I was like, oh, actually I don't need to uproot my life and move to New York. I can just go down the street to Cranbrook's fiber department. And yeah, so that was kind of like fashion to thinking about the culture around a textile. And the plant-based interest specifically rather than protein fibers or like wool, things from animals, was I was at an alpaca ranch on shearing day one day and watched more than 50 alpaca be sort of led into a barn, pinned down, and then made extremely uncomfortable while they were shorn. And I was just like, this is not for me. The smells, the sounds, pinning animals down. They assured us that they weren't hurt, they were just annoyed. But I don't know, that was when I was like, okay, I do want to be working with natural fibers rather than synthetics. I can't really do the protein fiber, and it was important for me to be involved at every level. And I just couldn't really see myself shearing any animals. So I was like, all right, redirect. What are the plant-based fiber processes? And that's kind of how I found hemp first and foremost. But it might still be illegal. But at the time, it was illegal to even cultivate hemp for fiber, right? Because there wasn't enough known about the amount of like THC in the stalks. So there were a few places that were even allowed to do that. So I was like, I don't want any smoke. I don't want any problems. What else could I do that's not hemp? And so that's when I found stinging nettle and learned that it was actually really common and it really strong fiber and kind of similar in process to hemp. Yeah, that's kind of the trajectory. I haven't been foraging as much lately. I think somebody found all my nettle spots in Detroit because when I go back, I'm like, oh, okay, people like nettles now. They used to be an annoying kind of nuisance for a lot of people because when you touch them, they literally like sting you. It's a protective mechanism. But they're super herbs. They're medicine. They can be fiber. They're great to eat. So I think people are just like, are hip now, and so all my nettle spots are picked over.
It seems that some of the work is done very introspectively, and it's interesting that you talk about the move towards plant, which is much more rhizomatic, and then like the Hoop project feels rhizomatic in a similar way. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of internal work happening, and one of my kind of tensions as a creative person is always like what to give away and what to keep, because as a person in this body, white cube gallery art world has not always been the safest place for ideas or history, let alone like my family's deep dark secrets, right? And so I think I'm constantly trying to understand whether or not to allow other folks to have an eye in on some deeply personal questions, and they're also not always, they're rarely resolved, right? They're kind of always ongoing. And I like this idea of like rhizomatic growing out instead of sort of growing up, because I think progress is always talked about, not always, but often talked about in a sort of like, like vertical fashion. And I think a lateral progress is kind of more aligned with the way that I think about the evolution of ideas, of projects, of myself. But yeah, it's very apt of you. I am doing a lot of deep questioning. I'm thinking through relationships, sometimes like 10 entities out, right? And maybe this is some of like, a lot of indigenous knowledge, thinking about like planning for the generations, 7 generations down the line. What are they going to have, or how is this, what seems like a small act, going to impact their lived experience? And I think about that with my ideas. Sometimes it's my Achilles heel though, because I'm like, if I don't know step 10, then I couldn't possibly start on step 2, right? I need to know where I'm going. But that isn't always true, and sometimes I get to step 3 and then I pivot, or I do know step 10. I think I know entity or relationship 10 is. But then once I get there, I'm like, I could have stopped at 3, or I could have made a turn back there and it would have been more generative. But yeah, I think there's also something about like seeds and generations and offspring, and not even just with plants, but like with me. So if I'm the kind of like ripple in the wave of like my particular like corner of humanity, right? This idea that it sounds corny, but you know, energy doesn't die, it just transforms. And so I think about that a lot. Like, you know, I'm literally just kind of moving on the ripples and waves of many, many people before me, and hopefully some of the things that I was looking for underground, sort of like my roots were sprouting, and then there was like, I don't know, some blockage right here, and I had to like go up and then over. Some of those moments for me were around like seeing myself in processes, or seeing myself in work or practices. When I was learning how to process nettle, I couldn't find anybody in my community to teach me that skill. And it was really frustrating because it's the kind of thing you kind of need to just do with your hands. So I had to go to YouTube. And the people on YouTube that were teaching that skill were like middle-aged, cis hetero white dudes in rural areas teaching survival videos. Right? And, you know, great, love that for them. You know, like, but I needed the skills. So I'm like, okay, let me sit through this and get the information. And one of the things that became important was like, okay, if I'm learning how to do this, some of my work is also just a track record, or like a record, so that some other person who's like got their roots growing, they're growing out, and they get to a thing and they're like, wait a minute, something stopped, like where's the water source? I can kind of be like, oh no, I got you, right? Like, you don't have to watch those rural dudes on YouTube. Like, you know. Is that answering your question? I don't know if it is. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.